First Minister, why should people vote for the SNP in the forthcoming general election, whenever it may be?
Well, pretty simply because Westminster isn't working for Scotland. From 14 years of austerity from a government that Scotland didn't vote for a Brexit we didn't vote for a cost of living crisis that we didn't create, but Scotland is suffering. So if Scotland wants to have its voice heard by Westminster, then you have to vote for SNP MPs. And there's another prize. You know, the Conservatives have caused so much misery right across the country. And I think every single Tory MP should be out of office. And there's a great prize that we can make Scotland Tory free. And the way you do that is by voting for the SNP, because in every single Conservative seat in Scotland, the SNP is in second place. So a great prize to make sure we get Scotland's voice heard. Great prize in making sure that we make Scotland Tory free, and the SNP will always, always stand up for the values of Scotland.
You seem to think that Sir Keir Starmer will become the Prime Minister. You seem fairly certain on that. How would the SNP have a voice under a Labour government? Why would they listen? Why would they need you?
Well, look at just the vote on Gaza and a ceasefire. The SNP is bringing forward a motion tomorrow. It looks like Labour will also be tabling a motion. They've changed their position to back what they're calling an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
But that's an internal argument within Labour more than...
No, the only reason they've changed is because of the pressure that the SNP has brought. The SNP has advocated consistently for an immediate ceasefire. If we hadn't brought that vote tomorrow to the House of Commons, Labour would not have shifted their position. So there's just one example of how we're able to influence Labour while they're in opposition.
That's imagine what opposition.
And imagine what we could do and how we could influence them.
But if they
were
got a majority in government, why would they need to bother with you?
Well, they would have to listen to Scotland. We would be able to force them on a number of issues through the internal pressure that we're able to exert in the way that we have over Gaza. Now, we could do that on lifting the two-child limit. We could do that in making sure that they don't dump their £28 billion Green Prosperity Fund, which they are now saying they're doing, and on a whole range of
But they wouldn't need your
issues.
votes.
Well, the point
if they're in the majority, they wouldn't need your votes.
Of course, the point is that we can continue to make sure that we push them and exert pressure on issues like the two-child limit, where actually I think a number of Labour MPs probably privately support scrapping the two-child limit. They won't do it because Keir Starmer tells them not to. But
and if he's in the majority government, he can continue to do that.
But if we brought the vote to the Parliament, that would, of course, like the Gaza ceasefire, make a number of Labour MPs nervous, think twice. They might rebel, they might have to vote against Keir Starmer. Exerts that internal pressure.
You've said that independence will be the first line of your manifesto. How do you deliver that?
Well, independence, of course, will be, as we've said and you've repeated, line 1, page 1 of the manifesto. And what we'll end up doing if we win the general election, that's my goal, of course, to win the general election in Scotland, is use that as a mandate to begin negotiating with a future UK government on how we give democratic effect to independence.
And does win mean a majority?
Win means most seats. That's what our conference, of course, backed in October last year.
So what is kind of most? I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about near to a majority? Are we talking near to the 29 seats?
No, the majority and most seats are, of course, different. So
yes.
we need to win the general election.
But it's vague. My point is it's vague. Most is vague, is it not?
No, I think most people understand that most means that you're going to win the general election.
So if you're short of a majority, you still think you'll be entitled to push for this?
Look, you've been covering general elections, I think, for longer than I have. And in most general elections, the rule's pretty simple. The winner of the general election is the one that wins the most seats. So we intend to win the most seats. But look, ultimately, we can talk about process. I'm happy to always do that. But the way that we're going to achieve independence for Scotland is if we build that popular support for independence. And at the moment, we've seen a number of polls that put support independence above 50%.
But not for the SNP to deliver that.
But for independence, of course, support. And that's what you've asked me about. You've asked me about how do you deliver independence.
How do the SNP deliver it?
Well, very, very simply, if you believe in independence, for any of your viewers that are watching this, if you believe in independence, if you believe that decisions about Scotland should be made by the people of Scotland, it's pretty simple. If the SNP is winning, then the cause of independence is winning. If, of course, our opponents win, those who oppose independence, they'll take that as a mandate for Westminster rule.
But you have been saying this for many, many years. The SNP has been saying this for many, many years and hasn't delivered anything. So you're talking about more seats. You're not even talking a majority. Previously, you've had, 48 seats in 2019? That was more than 80% of the seats. Westminster said no. In 2015, you're 56, almost all the seats in Scotland. Westminster still said no.
I'm really pleased.
How would you get that with the most?
I'm really pleased that you've just made those points for me. That what we've got is a Westminster government that, despite the fact that we win elections, gain mandates, stand in manifestos, get elected, get re-elected on a promise of a second independence referendum, that Westminster keeps saying no.
So what's going to be different this time?
So what's got to be different, and this is the point I'm making, is that we're going to get independence when we make sure that we create the conditions and the political pressure, and you do that by ensuring that you have a consistent majority for independence. It's how, again, you covered the Scottish Parliament and how we got devolution. We got devolution because we ensured there was a consistent majority for that Scottish Parliament. But so that's why we're working
hard. Your mandate is diminishing all the time over the years.
Quite the opposite, actually. Every time we stand on a manifesto and say that we are standing on a manifesto for a second referendum, win elections, get elected, get re-elected, that strengthens the mandate, doesn't weaken the mandate.
You've gone down from 56 to 48 to now you're talking about most. I mean, it's quite a significant difference.
Again, you have covered elections. I've watched elections. I've been involved in elections. If you win an election, that tends to be a really good mandate and verdict from the people of
That's
Scotland.
my point. You've had big wins and nothing has happened. What's going to be different this time?
Well, yes, because Westminster keeps blocking, keeps saying no. So what we've got to do, and I said this in the leadership election contest, probably last time I was in this studio, and I made the point then that you win independence, we win independence for our country if we create the popular support, make sure there's consistent popular support for independence.
Let's look at local authorities who are having difficulties just now. You're critical of Westminster for not respecting the Scottish Parliament. What respect are you showing local authorities, particularly with the freezing of the council tax, with no consultation?
Well, two things. First of all, we're showing respect to local government by signing the Verity House Agreement, which of course the local authorities...
You're ignoring.
No, actually local authorities were working hard with, and that's one of the first things I did was to make sure that we signed that agreement with COSLA.
The agreement was signed, but COSLA say it's being ignored.
Well, no, it's not being. Let me come to the point. So the second point, of course, the way we're respecting local authorities is by making sure we provide them with an increase in funding. At a time when our budget over the last 2 years has had a real terms cut of around about £500 million, we're making sure we're investing, giving more money to our local authorities.
They don't see that.
Well, that's the fact.
We're thinking Glasgow, as a Glasgow City Council, lose short of £107 million over the next 3 years. And anybody walking around Glasgow can see that.
And I'm happy, of course, to show you the facts and the figures that of course, tell you that we've given an uplift to our local authorities on of course, the difficulty of budgets more generally. Of course, we have suffered cut after 14 years of austerity from a Conservative government. But what we've chosen to do is give an uplift to local authorities.
But you're behaving like Westminster. You're not letting them do it. And you're not allowing them to have the freedom to, raise more money through council tax. You're imposing on them without
What's my responsibility as First Minister? My responsibility as First Minister is to make sure I protect households up and down this country. We're in the midst of one of the worst cost of living crises I've ever seen in my lifetime. One of the areas I do have control over is over council tax. And we have that ability to make sure that people aren't hammered with a 10% increase as we're seeing down south.
So you're telling the councils what to do. That's what I'm saying.
What we're doing is we're prepared to work with local authorities to say
But they say you're not. You're imposing it.
No,
and that's what you claim Westminster does to the Scottish Parliament.
No, what we're doing is we're fully funding it. We're giving them the money to fully fund it, and above inflation, 5%. So we're giving them more than inflation and saying that there.
That sounds grand, but the councils don't accept that.
Of course it sounds grand. Well, they do. That's wrong, John. You've got Glasgow, North Lanarkshire, Edinburgh indicating now they're going to. You've got a whole range of local authorities at Dundee. You've got a whole range of local authorities that are indicating that they're going to be freezing the council tax. And I expect every single local authority will do that because they will look at
consultation.
Because they will look at the five. They will. Well, no. We've offered a fully funded council tax freeze, and that's very different to Westminster, who will not only impose things in the Scottish Parliament, not only
councils say they aren't fully funded. That's the important.
But what they'll also do is the Conservative government is cutting our budget. We're not doing that. We're giving them an uplift in their.
But there's a disagreement.
And but there can't be a disagreement. We're giving them literally an uplift to the budget compared to last year. There's no disagreement in that. And we're also.
But they need more, is what they're saying, and they're not getting it. Let's move on. The government record. Waiting times, education, drug deaths, housing crisis, the ferries fiasco. It's not great, is it?
Our record is a really good record, hence why we, of course, have been re-elected again and again and again. So let's take.
That's a good record.
Well, let me talk through it. On the health service, of course, the health service. faced the biggest shock of its 75-year existence with COVID. What we've done is made sure that we pay the staff, the NHS staff, who are the backbone of our health service, ensure they're the best paid staff anywhere in the UK. And that's why, of course, Scotland Scotland hasn't lost a single day of NHS activity due to strike action. The only nation
you're having to cancel NHS
so.
building programmes, and maybe there's a choice had to be made there.
No, because one's revenue, one's capital. The reason, of course, we've had to look at delaying possibly some NHS health infrastructure is because the UK government has cut our budget by 10%.
You're saying that people
years.
should be the waiting times or what's happening in the NHS is actually good.
What I'm saying is, of course, we're working on the recovery of the NHS. But let me also take the point, you mentioned education as well.
Yes, education, yeah.
And of course in education we've got now the highest record levels of young people from areas of deprivation going to university.
We're down in every international standing. Not in
every international. There's been some challenges. I'm not denying that there are challenges in education. But also let's look at the fact that we have, again, record numbers of young people going into positive destinations in terms of further education, higher education.
So you're saying your government record is good on all these things? Your government record is good?
Of course our government record is good. That's why we keep getting re-elected. Are there challenges? I don't doubt that for a minute, but I'll stand on our record very proudly to say that we've delivered for the people of this country.
You on tax, you're saying that the broadest shoulders will take the biggest, will take on more responsibility. You've got senior nurses, teachers, senior police officers, public servants who don't consider themselves particularly rich, who are having to pay extra tax. How do you justify that to them? Briefly on that.
Well, we've asked the top 5%, including people like me on a good salary, so people who are the top 5% higher earners, to pay a little bit more tax so that we can invest in exactly all of the issues you've asked me about. You've just spent the last 10 minutes asking me about funding for local authorities, about education, about health, but yet you're saying to me we shouldn't, you're suggesting that we shouldn't ask the top 5% to pay a little bit more tax.
But what about these middle earners?
Well, let me tell you,
people have just
the majority of people in Scotland pay less tax than their counterparts in the UK. The majority of people.
Yeah.
Now, what do you get in Scotland if you're...
Some of these things, some of the figures you're talking about there, people paying less than £29,000 in tax, but according to the IFS, that's £23 a year. That's a takeaway. I mean, is it really that big a deal?
It's a pretty big deal in the midst of a cost of living crisis.
£23 a year.
If you can end up ensuring that the majority of taxpayers pay less tax than elsewhere, and you freeze the council tax bills. But the important point is this, John. For those that we do ask to pay a little bit more tax, what they get is free university education. They don't pay a single penny for the prescription charges. If they're under 22, they don't pay for bus travel. If they're over 60, disabled, they don't pay for bus travel.
The country pays for it, and we've got, what is that, £1 billion shortfall?
But that's the social contract. The social contract is people like me in the top 5% highest earners should pay a little bit more tax so that everybody gets particular benefits, and also that we can target some benefits like the Scottish Child Payment and our other social security, which last year alone helped to lift 90,000 children out of poverty.
If you hadn't had all the money wasted in the ferries fee, ask how many more children could you have lifted out of poverty?
Look, I've made many statements about the fact that we didn't and we haven't got right, of course, the building of 801, 802, ferries, Glen Sannox, Glen Rosa. We've got to do better.
Right.
But we're also investing in a number of ferries, of course, that will be coming online, not just this year, but over the course of the next few years.
Very finally, a commentator wrote that Nicola Sturgeon made the news. The news happens to you. And I'm thinking of things like Michael Matheson, the ongoing police inquiry into previous SNP leadership, and the COVID WhatsApps. Things that happen to you. Are you an unlucky leader?
No, I would say leading your country makes you the luckiest person in the world. It's the greatest honour of my life. But also, of course, I've just spent this week, early part of this week, in the northeast of Scotland, where I was able to outline how we'll support not just the oil and gas industry, the energy sector as a whole, to just transition to net zero. I'm able to, of course, point to the changes that I've been able to make.
But on these
which
issues,
have helped to,
things that happen to you, not decisions you're making, news happening to you.
I think every single leader or head of any government will often deal with things that are both internal and external, where they have control or don't have control. The question is, how do you respond to that? I hope in all of these issues I've been able to respond honestly, with integrity, and show that I'll always put the interests of the country and the people of this country first.
Humza Yousaf, thanks for joining us in Scotland tonight.
Thanks, John.